There's a strange feeling in the air in 2026. You open the economic news and see reassuring headlines. Unemployment rate at 4.4%, historically low. JP Morgan sending optimistic reports to investors. Goldman Sachs guaranteeing that the labor market is resilient. Federal Reserve projecting stability through 2027. But when you talk to real people, at family dinners, in daily traffic, in the supermarket line, the story is completely different. Everyone is working. Everyone is keeping schedules. Everyone is doing everything right. And nobody is accumulating anything. Bills close at the limit. Savings don't grow. The future seems more distant with each passing month. This video is not about economic crisis. It's about something more dangerous and more subtle. It's about the exact moment when the system continues working perfectly well, but stops working for you. And while most people try to understand what's happening, a small group, about 1% of the population, has already completely repositioned itself. Not because these people are smarter, not because they worked harder, but because they understand the game that nobody is explaining on the evening news. Let's start with the official data, because everyone is looking at them the wrong way. January 2026. The unemployment rate in the United States drops to 4.4%. This represents a decrease from the 4.6% of November 2025. Every serious economist, every respectable financial institution repeats the same narrative. The American labor market is resilient. Companies continue hiring. The system works. The economy is healthy. And that's exactly where, in this apparent normality, the real problem lies. Because when macroeconomic numbers say one thing, and people's daily experience says something completely different, there's always a group that sees the gap before everyone else. And this group doesn't waste time discussing whether the economy is good or bad. This group repositions itself. Economists at JP Morgan, one of the most influential financial institutions in the world, published their forecasts for 2026. They expect the labor market to continue cooling, with the unemployment rate reaching a peak of about 4.5% during the year, possibly with improvement in the second half. This sounds technical and distant from your life, but it's not. When they say cooling, it means fewer hires, less mobility, fewer opportunities to negotiate better salaries. Goldman Sachs, another Wall Street giant, goes along the same lines. It predicts that the unemployment rate will stabilize around 4.5% in 2026, without a significant decrease in the short term. But here comes the part that almost nobody caught in their report. They released a discreet but powerful alert. If the adoption of artificial intelligence is faster than expected, or if companies focus more aggressively on reducing labor costs, this entire seemingly controlled scenario could change from water to wine, and change quickly. Nicole Bachot, labor market economist at ZipRecruiter, was even more direct in her analysis. She characterized 2026 as a year of slow and steady growth. But then she added a crucial detail that should be in every headline, but isn't. She pointed out that the current dependence on job growth in a single sector, which is healthcare, indicates an extremely unstable base for the economy as a whole. Think about that for a second. All job creation in the world's largest economy is concentrated in hospitals, clinics, and medical care. When an entire economy depends on a single sector to generate work, that's not strength, that's not resilience, that's fragility disguised as stability. Oscar Munoz, chief U.S. macro strategist at TD Securities, described the dynamics of 2026 with a phrase that should be engraved in everyone's mind who is trying to understand this moment. He said, "Few hires and few layoffs." Translating from economist speak to plain English, this means the labor market is completely frozen. Whoever is inside a good company stays. Whoever is outside can't get in. And whoever is inside a bad company or without growth margin just survives, month after month, year after year. Ernie Tedeschi, who is not just any economist but former chief economist of the White House Council of Economic Advisers, brought the data that nobody really wants to face. He pointed to clear signs of weakness in the labor market that general averages hide. The increase in long-term unemployment, the constant reduction in job offers. When he put all these indicators together and compared them with historical data, the conclusion was direct. This is the weakest labor market since mid-2017. But nobody is calling this a crisis, because the general numbers, the averages, are still within what they consider acceptable. And it's exactly in this silence, in this apparent normality, that the greatest wealth transfers in history happen. If you're noticing that something doesn't match between what the news says and what you live every day, this is exactly the type of analysis that continues here on the channel. It's not about quick promises of enrichment. It's about understanding the real mechanisms of the economy before trying to play the game. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because what comes next gets even more interesting. We're going to talk about what this invisible misalignment that's happening right under everyone's nose really means. Here's the central point that almost nobody explains with the necessary clarity. Unemployment is not just the absence of work. Unemployment, in the deepest and most structural sense, is misalignment. That's the distance between what the economic system needs and what people can offer. And in 2026, this misalignment has reached a level we haven't seen in decades. Millions of Americans have formal employment. They work 40 hours a week. Some work 50, 60 hours. They meet deadlines, they hit targets, they do everything expected of them. But they have no margin. They don't accumulate wealth. They don't build real financial security. They produce value every day, but don't participate in the growth of that value. The salary at the end of the month covers the bills, maybe a little is left over, and the cycle starts again. Meanwhile, specific sectors of the economy, often completely invisible to the general public, are concentrating efficiency, data, automation, and scale in a way we've never seen before. These sectors don't appear in headlines. They don't have famous CEOs giving television interviews. They don't do massive advertising. But they're reorganizing the entire structure of how wealth is generated and distributed. The scarcity that matters in 2026 is not scarcity of job openings. It's scarcity of positioning. And always, throughout economic history, when scarcity changes places, money moves with it. This is not cruel. This is not unfair in a moral sense. It's simply structural. The economy, as a system, does not reward isolated effort. It never has. It rewards fit at the right time, in the right place, with the right skills or the right capital. If you look at previous periods of economic transition, whether the Industrial Revolution or the transition to the digital economy in the 1990s and 2000s, the pattern is always the same. Most people try to preserve what they already have. They try to hold on to their current job. They try to maintain their current lifestyle. They try not to take risks. And a small minority, usually between 1% and 5% of the population, completely reorganizes how they participate in the economic system. In 2026, this reorganization is not happening in newspaper headlines. It's happening behind the scenes. Supply chains are being shortened and optimized. Services are becoming increasingly less dependent on labor-intensive work. Business models based on subscription, data, digital intermediation are replacing old structures that depended on volume and physical scale. While most people discuss salaries and benefits, a minority is discussing cost structure, operating margins, and process control. And this difference in conversation, this difference in focus, usually anticipates the difference in financial results 5, 10 years later. The most revealing piece of data comes from an analysis that went almost unnoticed. In 2025, the American economy generated only 584,000 jobs in the entire year. To put this in context, in years considered normal, this number is usually 3-4 times higher. But unemployment didn't explode. Why? Because 800,000 people simply left the workforce. They gave up looking. They accepted that the game changed and they can no longer play the old way. This is the real misalignment. It's not an explosive crisis with dramatic headlines. It's slow and silent erosion. And erosion is much worse than explosion, because nobody notices until the ground gives way completely under their feet. So finally, the question everyone wants to understand: who is getting rich while everyone feels they're spinning in the same place? The honest answer, without romanticization and without demonization, is silent strategists. They're not heroes of the story. They're not exploitative villains. They're people and companies who understand a simple logic. When labor costs rise, when predictability falls, when volatility increases, the economic system strongly values those who can reduce friction, who connects dots that were previously separate, who solves logistical bottlenecks, who eliminates unnecessary intermediaries, who automates processes that previously depended on dozens or hundreds of employees. In times of accelerated economic expansion, everyone gains a little. In times of stagnation disguised as stability, like 2026, wealth does not arise from rapid expansion. It arises from surgical efficiency. Less waste at each stage of the process, less intermediation in each transaction, less dependence on old and expensive structures, more control over critical variables, more predictability of costs and revenues, more margin in each operation. While the public debate, discussions on social media, news programs eternally revolve around unemployment, inflation, and interest rates, the real movement of capital is happening in the redistribution of risk. And here's a concept that needs to be absolutely clear. Risk in 2026 doesn't just mean buying volatile stocks or investing in cryptocurrencies. Risk means taking on operational responsibilities that others are avoiding. Last-mile logistics, which is complex, expensive, and full of problems. Unglamorous essential services, like waste management, infrastructure maintenance, specialized cleaning services. Invisible digital infrastructures, like servers, data security, payment systems. Historically, and you can verify this in any serious economic history book, whenever an economy enters defensive mode, these areas that nobody wants, that everyone finds boring, that don't give social prestige, become absolutely silent gold mines, not because they grow rapidly, but because they become indispensable. And what is indispensable in times of uncertainty gets to command the price. It's not the supplier who accepts the market price. It's the supplier who dictates the price because there's no easy substitute. The most recent economic data confirms this wealth concentration in a brutal way. The disparity in income and wealth in the United States has been growing since the 1970s. This is not news. But in 2026, this disparity gained a new component that accelerates everything: accumulation speed. Individuals and families who already have capital can invest in stocks, bonds, real estate funds, assets that generate significant compound returns. The American stock market hit consecutive records in 2025 and begins 2026 on the same trajectory. Those invested in these assets are seeing their wealth grow 10, 15, 20% a year without lifting a finger. Meanwhile, those who depend exclusively on monthly salary are being systematically eroded by inflation, which, even controlled in terms of percentage, never completely stops. By the cost of living that rises in essential items like housing, health, and education, and by the absolute lack of financial margin to invest, to take risks, to reposition themselves. A recent study pointed out something that should be in all conversations about economics, but isn't. Much of the increase in consumption that is keeping the American economy running comes from spending by higher income brackets. The richest Americans, driven by a stock market that continues to hit records, continue to spend freely. Expensive dinners, international travel, luxury cars, renovations to vacation homes. Meanwhile, low and middle-income families are financially pressured, cutting non-essential expenses, postponing important purchases, with no conviction that the situation will improve in the coming years. There's an old rule that crosses generations, that survives all crises and all economic expansions. When everyone runs desperately to the same side, the real value is always in the opposite path. In 2026, while millions of people fiercely compete for security in traditional employment, while they send resumes to the same companies, while they compete for the same positions in saturated sectors, a minority is building security in a completely different way. This minority is focused on control of processes that generate predictable revenue, control of contracts that guarantee stable margin, control of data that allows better decisions faster, control of systems that eliminate dependence on third parties. This is not a moral question of right or wrong. It's an absolutely cold reading of economic incentives. The system, and when I say system, I'm talking about the market, capitalism. The way resources are allocated does not reward those who desperately need it. The system rewards those who can make it more efficient, faster, cheaper, more predictable. And this brutal but transparent logic explains why, even with more people unemployed or underemployed, even with more families struggling to make ends meet, some individual fortunes continue to be created at record speed, almost completely off the radar of traditional media. Let's talk about education and qualification, because this matters a lot in this story. The modern economy, especially the American one, requires high professional qualification in very specific areas: software engineering, data analysis, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, biotechnology. Unequal access to quality education, which has always existed but has worsened in recent decades, directly contributes to wage and opportunity differences. Those who can pay for elite education, or who are lucky enough to be born into families that value and can finance education, enter the job market with credentials that open doors. Those who don't have this access, even being intelligent and hardworking, face barriers that are practically insurmountable. The high-growth sectors of the American economy, mainly technology and innovation, tend to generate salaries well above average and real opportunities for enrichment for those with the right skills in the right positions. But these sectors employ a small fraction of the total workforce. Most people work in sectors that are stagnant or in slow decline. Physical retail, traditional transportation, repetitive administrative services, low-tech manufacturing. These sectors are not disappearing overnight, but they're also not offering real wage growth or upward mobility opportunities. Economic policies and structural changes of recent decades also play a central role in this story. Tax cuts for higher income brackets, which theoretically should stimulate investment and growth for everyone, in practice concentrated even more wealth at the top. Decreased union influence, which historically helped negotiate better wages and conditions for workers, left most people negotiating individually against giant corporations, with no real bargaining power. High overall productivity of the American economy, which is undeniable and impressive when compared to other countries, should theoretically benefit everyone. But the gains from this productivity, in the last 4 decades, have concentrated almost exclusively in the hands of shareholders and top executives, instead of being distributed through higher wages for the base of the pyramid. This is not conspiracy theory. This is data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Reserve respected universities. Productivity went up. Real wages for most, adjusted for inflation, remained practically stagnant. Deep down, when you stop to think calmly and honestly, the unemployment paradox of 2026 is not primarily economic. It's psychological. It separates, almost surgically, those who merely react to what happens from those who position themselves before things happen. Those who passively wait for stability to return from those who actively build their own resilience. Those who measure success exclusively in monthly paycheck from those who measure in autonomy, maneuvering room and ability to adapt quickly. Scarcity in any economic system always reveals what really matters to that system. And the capitalist market system, whether we like it or not, whether we agree or not, always leaves clues about what it values. Some of these clues are extremely loud. Everyone sees. Everyone comments. Everyone desperately runs after. New cryptocurrencies. Stocks of technology companies that promise to revolutionize everything. Real estate in neighborhoods that are appreciating. And when everyone runs after exactly the same thing at the same time, what inevitably happens? Value dilutes, prices rise, margins fall, and those who arrive last usually fare poorly. Other clues are almost invisible to most. Subtle movements in government regulations, structural changes in supply chains, sectors considered boring or outdated, that are being quietly reorganized by new technologies. These areas don't appear in sensational headlines. They don't generate lively conversations at parties. They don't have influencers talking about them on Instagram. But they're reorganizing the economy from below, creating discrete fortunes, building empires that will last decades. The largest fortunes of the next decade, of the next 20 years, will probably not be born from noise, media, hype. They will be born from well-interpreted silence, from someone who noticed a structural inefficiency that nobody else was paying attention to, from someone who took a risk that others avoided because it seemed boring or too difficult, from someone who connected two apparently unrelated points and created value where it didn't exist before. This does not mean, and it's important to make absolutely clear, that high unemployment or the economic difficulty of the majority is something good. It's not. It's painful for millions of families. It's unfair in many ways. But it means that these difficulties, these distortions in the system, inevitably create opportunities for those who can read imperfect maps, for those who can see patterns where others see only chaos. Most people look only at the final number. Unemployment rate 4.4%. GDP growth 2%, inflation at so many percent. These are important numbers, but they tell only a small fraction of the story. The minority that really prospers in any economic environment observes the relationships between numbers. Where exactly is labor cost rising faster? Where is dependence on specific suppliers dangerously increasing? Where is the system becoming more fragile and vulnerable to shocks? In 2026, correctly answering these questions, and more importantly, acting based on these answers is worth infinitely more than trying to predict whether the index will rise 0.3 or fall 0.2 in the next quarter. Because real wealth, wealth that lasts, wealth that multiplies, in this specific scenario we're living through, is born much less from the ability to predict the distant future, and much more from the ability to quickly adapt to the constantly changing present. And perhaps this is the most important reflection to close, and for you to take with you after this video ends. In moments of economic transition like what we're experiencing in 2026, you don't need to run desperately. You don't need to make hasty decisions. You don't need to panic. You need to see, you need to stop, observe, understand the real mechanisms that are in operation. Economic history, if you study it carefully, consistently shows that those who try to accelerate without first understanding the terrain they're walking on usually get lost along the way. They make bad decisions. They waste resources. They lose real opportunities by chasing mirages. Those who observe patiently, who learn from what's happening, who adjust their course based on real data and not on emotions or sensational headlines, even if they take longer, even if they seem slower, usually go much further and in a much more sustainable way. Unemployment may rise in the coming months. It may stabilize, it may even fall a little. The economy may oscillate between optimism and pessimism. Markets may go up and down. But the fundamental mechanisms of wealth, the deep rules of how value is created and captured, continue to obey the same old logics. These rules haven't changed. They just change location, they change sector, they change format. And those who understand this early, who position themselves before the majority realizes, rarely need to explain the results later. If you made it this far, it's probably because this way of looking at economics, money, opportunities makes sense to you. If you want to continue receiving analyses that go beyond superficial headlines, that explain the real mechanisms behind the numbers, subscribe to the channel now, leave a like on this video, and activate the notification bell. Because while the majority will continue discussing whether unemployment will go to 4.5 or 4.6%, we'll be here discussing how to reposition yourself, how to identify real opportunities, how to build true financial security in a constantly changing world. The question that remains is not whether you will be affected by the changes that are happening now. You will. Everyone will. The real question, the only one that truly matters, is which side will you be on when the game really starts? On the side of the 99% who are reacting, or on the side of the 1% who is positioning?